So, Kathleen Kennedy reportedly is leaving Lucasfilm and leaving Disney by the end of the year. So, according to the Screen Rant article, she leaves behind a mixed legacy. I question what part is mixed. What part of the stuff that she helmed really was in line with Lucas's vision for his story? I don't see it. So I'm going to go through most of this article. So Kathleen Kennedy is reportedly retiring at the end of the year. There is a God. And she leaves behind her a mixed legacy for Lucasfilm and Star Wars. Star Wars fans awoke today to a great disturbance in the Force. Reports that Lucasfilm boss Kathleen Kennedy is retiring at the end of the year. Hallelujah. George Lucas's chosen successor, Kennedy, had served as something of a lightning rod for criticism of the Disney era. A lightning rod for criticism that was well deserved based on the product that Disney has created. She'd found herself frequently targeted by online campaigns, YouTubers that, they often blame these popular YouTubers, and even South Park. All that makes it rather difficult to establish Kennedy's true legacy. Kennedy's true legacy was burning Lucas's vision down to the ground. It's pretty black or white. There is no gray. Has her tenure been a successful one? Is she some kind of quote-unquote woke warrior? Woke, even though the right has hijacked it, the mainstream has hijacked it, woke means awake, has nothing to do with most of the gobbledygook that people use the word for. She's not woke. People on the left aren't woke. People on the right aren't woke. None of these people are woke. Let's go ahead, rant over. Responsible for pushing a political agenda at Lucasfilm. I don't know, maybe. To me, she was pushing a bunch of failure. The truth is probably rather more complex than her detractors on those aforementioned YouTube channels like to think. No, it wasn't. It was trash. The last 3 movies were complete and utter garbage. Doo-doo. Kathleen Kennedy was responsible for turning Lucasfilm into a functioning studio. Lucasfilm. Lucas was responsible for doing that. Lucas created Lucasfilm. Lucasfilm was already functioning. Kathleen Kennedy wasn't Disney's choice. She was Lucas's. Yes, she was Lucas's choice, which is why so many people have been so angry at her for so many years, you get me? The reason why there has been so much animosity towards Kathleen Kennedy is because Lucas chose her as his successor. Oh my God. He brought her into role shortly before selling Lucasfilm to Disney in an attempt to control his legacy. Yeah. As Disney CEO Bob Iger, another not great person, recalled in his autobiography, The Ride of a Lifetime, a few months before we closed the deal and flushed Star Wars down the toilet. George hired the producer Kathleen Kennedy to run Lucasfilm. Kathy had co-founded Amblin Entertainment along with her husband Frank Marshall and Steven Spielberg, and had produced E.T. and the Jurassic Park franchise and a dozen of critical and commercial hits. It was an interesting move on George's part. We were on the verge of buying the company, but he suddenly decided who was going to run it and ultimately produce the upcoming films. It didn't upset us, just as it surprised Kathy to learn that the company she was agreeing to run was about to be sold. Kathy is a legendary producer, and she has been a great partner, and this was one final way for George to put someone in whom he trusted to be the steward of his legacy. So I'm going to go off script right here. I think, in all fairness, if she had been head and Lucas hadn't sold it, I don't think we would have seen some of the content we saw. I think if she had run it, but Lucas hadn't sold it, we would have seen very different content, in all fairness. So that I can give her. But Kennedy faced an unenviable challenge, one that we tend to underestimate. As Iger noted, Lucas had many talented employees, particularly on the tech side, but no directors other than George, and no film development or production pipeline. Kennedy essentially had to build the studio from the ground up, which likely explains the many Star Wars movies and TV shows that were canceled due to creative differences. I mean, this is like fantasy. I mean, this is bad fantasy. This article is bad fantasy. Those first few years were no doubt very difficult. I mean, like they're caping for Kennedy, like every other line they're caping for Kennedy. It's crazy. Disney needed to recoup costs, leading to an ambitious push to release 3 movies by the end of 2018. Kennedy more than pulled it off, but the accounts of behind-the-scene drama on Rogue One and Solo are legendary. The studio moved away from the big screen from 2019 and seemed to have learned some important lessons. The Mandalorian and Grogu will release next year, and production there appears to have been smooth. Disney often hampered Kennedy's best efforts. I'm not going to read the rest of this because it's just nonsense. So thankfully, according to reports, Kathleen's going to leave. So the article goes on to essentially talk about how not all of her steps were failures because, for example, the sequel trilogy that I had mentioned before, my take on it was that it's not really good, that this was, because it made $4 billion, this made it good, despite the fact that it totally took one of the titular characters, or one of the old school characters, Luke, and turned him into an angry ne'er-do-well, drinking green milk, and then took a Palpatine who really had no training and just sort of destroyed pretty much the one quote-unquote person of color they had in the plot, and we could go on and on and on, and some of this stuff, if you've seen some of my other content about Star Wars, I'm not going to regurgitate stuff that I've already said. Kathleen Kennedy has value as a producer before taking over Lucasfilm under Disney. Is Iger or the people above her responsible for her actions in terms of Star Wars? Of course they are. But the fact that she was over the studio and let a lot of the trite, and one perfect example would be Acolyte from last year, pass through and justify it and have all kinds of other stories for not just the Acolyte, but many of the other shows, or just even the direction that they've been headed for an extended period of time. To say that she had no part in it is just ludicrous, and it's completely fictitious and fantasy, in a really horrendous way. Fantasy, the kind that you get from somebody that needs to take halcyon pills, and you need to take their laces away from them. So with that, I'm gonna leave you guys. Like, subscribe. I'm out.